We have a little passage here to look at when the Master says, "All things are delivered to me of my Father, and no man knoweth who the Son is, but the Father, and who the Father is, but the Son, and he to whom the Son will reveal him." Then he turned to his disciples, and he said privately, "Blessed are the eyes which see the things that ye see. For I tell you that many prophets and kings have desired to see those things which ye see, and have not seen them, and to hear those things which ye hear, and have not heard them." And this applies to you and me when we look at this Sermon on the Mount. If we can see things in it that kings of the world have sought but have not been able to see, and hear things they have not been able to hear, it is only because we have been given a message of truth that is now ready to erupt in this world. A message that the world has been seeking itself, and now through such individuals who have been able to receive the inner word, like Joel, we are able to bring out a message in the sermon that has ever been here, and waiting for ears that can hear. Now we have three major principles tonight, each of which is an integral and vital part of your consciousness. Your divine consciousness already contains these principles. But the human intellect, separated from the divine consciousness, has only seen these principles, read them, talked of them, even boasted of knowing them, without really accepting them 100%. Now let's look at forswearing, which follows right from the work we did last week, and see if we can hear the Master's voice and see what he put there for us to see. Again, ye have heard that it hath been said by them of old time, Thou shalt not forswear thyself, but shalt perform unto the Lord thine oaths. But I say unto you, swear not at all, neither by heaven, for it is God's throne, nor by the earth, for it is his footstool, and neither by Jerusalem, for it is the city of the great King. And neither shalt thou swear by thy head, because thou canst not make one hair white or black. But let your communication be yea, yea, nay, nay. For whatsoever is more than these cometh of evil. Now let's see the local references, because that's always your clue into the deeper significance. And the forswearing, the pledging in advance, the committing yourself, there were several local references to that. One of which was the signing up these young, immature men who entered the clergy and making them sign long-term contracts to be sure that they would be devoted to the particular message they were signing into. They were forswearing today that which they would do for the next 10 years, or possibly for a lifetime. And the Master is telling us that this forswearing, pledging your life down to a particular doctrine, is not acceptable. This was one method of forswearing. There were others. They were actually signing blank checks, you might say, putting a mortgage on their soul and determining in advance what they were going to think for the next 10 years. Now, as you know, the very spirit within you must flow. You can't be poor in spirit and at the same time committed to a doctrine. The very nature of the message of poor in spirit is to keep you uncommitted, open, willing to go with the guidance of the inner voice and not subject to a human authority. And so in forswearing, man was turning away from the inner voice. Man was turning away from divine guidance. He was accepting a creed, a doctrine, and vowing that he would follow, pursue, and teach that doctrine as long as it existed. Now there was another local reference, the taking of the divine oath. This was in the bartering in the marketplace, where the buyer and seller would indulge in conversations in which the buyer would offer a price and the seller would offer a price, and they'd never get together, haggling away. And finally, to enforce the fact that he was telling the truth, the seller would say, "By God and all his angels, I vow that this cost me $6, but you can have it for $3. And then the buyer would haggle a little bit. Finally, the buyer would counter with another oath that this would be as high as he'd go, and then the seller would counter again with another divine oath about how he was really telling the truth now. It really cost him $3, and the other fellow could have it for $1.50. And I understand this took place for quite a large part of the day, with each one swearing by God and by the Holy Temple of Jerusalem and by anything else they could think of swearing by that they were honest people, making their promises and then using God or Jerusalem or the earth in some way as the guarantor of the promise, when they had no desire whatsoever to fulfill that promise. Now this was another local reference. The people of that day recognized it, and they recognized the oaths that they were taking and that the young clerics were taking in order to become part of a doctrine. And so they were speaking on the terminology level of the populace of the day. But now, veiled behind this taking of oaths, was a message so deep that even to this moment only true spiritual students are aware of it. A man is not responsible to anyone but God. You are not responsible first to a man and second to God. Your responsibility lies in the province of your Creator. And therefore to use pledges to another man which commit you not to God but to the man or to the doctrine or to the religion is a form of sacrilegiousness, because we must at all times be living by the Word of God and not by the authority of a man. To forswear, to sign a contract for 10 years, that for the next 10 years you're going to belong to this religion and teach this religion, is to close your eyes to the fact that inner evolution is the seed in man that must continue to bring us to higher levels of consciousness. And when you sign away your consciousness for the next 10 years, you're saying, to the seed of divinity within yourself that you're not interested in finding the Christ. You're interested in living the human life. Now this is fine for those who are. But if our righteousness is to exceed the scribes and Pharisees, if we are to glorify the Father, we cannot do it on the principle of self-righteousness or human righteousness or religious righteousness. It must be on the principle of what is the will of the Father. And the will of the Father is clearly expressed in remain poor in spirit, letting the fresh manna fall daily, and never once allowing yourself the self-indulgence of complacency, of following the old tried and true traditional routine because it's so comfortable. This is not the Christ path. And those who would anchor us in the traditional forswearing, I pledge to be a Democrat because my father was, and I pledge to be a Protestant because my father was. This is forswearing, predetermining, outlining in advance not the will of the Father but your own individual human will. And so we must be very cautious that we do not forswear in such a way that our soul is literally mortgaged. I suppose you might say from this particular commandment that we are to remain open-minded, living from the within, beholding to no man, not a prisoner of a creed or dogma, and not following a path simply because it's the easiest path to follow. Now you can see all around you that most of the world is forsworn. Certain people are forsworn to their nation. Others are forsworn to their religion. They can't tell you which is going to come first. But how many are forsworn only to God? So that, above all, the voice of the Father within is the only pledge that you have made. To thine own self be true, and it follows as the night the day, thou canst be false to any man. Now, we can, through human loyalties and human integrity, fulfill certain localized pledges. But the moment we feel, as many do in high places, that our human loyalties come above the loyalty to the inner voice, in that moment we have become scribes and Pharisees. Why, that's no better than the principle of Old Tammany Hall. The pork barrel stuff in which you pay back for the fellow who scratched your back. In fact, it's this very principle of the pork barrel which in politics is the forswearing. A fellow gets you to do a favor, to accept a favor, and the next thing you know, after you've accepted his favor, you're committed. You're forsworn. Now comes election time, and we'd like somebody in the precincts knocking on doorbells. And you remember what I did for you, and so there you are, forsworn. It doesn't matter who the candidate is anymore. Your loyalty is now to the fellow who did you the favor. And you have to go with his candidate if you play the game that way. And if you know politics, that's it. That's how it's played. It's forswearing each individual. His job may be at stake, his income. And of course it's all crooked politics. It has nothing to do with a divine way of life. And once we let ourselves be snared into such a relationship, we can never think for a moment that we're living the spiritual life. We're merely imprisoned in human concepts, and not very good ones at that. I say unto you, swear not at all. In other words, make no pledges. Don't deliver an oath that I will do this. Don't take any oaths. Neither by heaven, for it is God's throne, nor by the earth, for it is his footstool, neither by Jerusalem, for it is the city of the great King. It makes no difference how far and wide you go, whether it's earth or heaven or the temple or the church. All is of God. And therefore your only responsibility is to the Father within. For the earth is the Lord's and the fullness thereof. And any man who can persuade you that there is a part of this earth that belongs to him and not to God has fooled you. You very clearly are set free from bondage to any man. They were then but didn't know it, and we today know it. We serve one master, not Mammon, God. Neither shalt thou swear by thy head, because thou canst not make one hair white or black. Actually, it's interesting to note that all of science has been unable to change the growth of the color of a man's hair from the original. It's going to be that color. Nobody's going to change the pigment within, only without. And the Father still is the power, the source, the one from which all is derived. Now then, we see a deeper meaning here. These pledges that we would make, I promise this and I promise that, I will adhere to this regulation and to that. This is the personal sense functioning, which does not realize that the Father, which is source, creator, is the source of all good, and that no man really has anything to give another. You haven't love to give another, or intelligence, or even supply. You may think you're the donor, or you may think another is the donor to you, but it isn't true. And the realization here is that all emanates from the Father. And we begin to look only to the Father for our good. It may come through another person, but that person is merely the bearer of good tidings from the Father to you. We begin to see that no man controls your income. A woman doesn't look to her husband for her income when she knows the truth that God is the only provider. A man doesn't look to his employer, for God is the only provider. A businessman doesn't look to his customer, because God is the only provider. We cannot make one hair white or black. We begin to see supply, health, life itself, as in essence emanating from the Father. And we begin to lose our human concern. The personal me doesn't have to depend on a customer, or on a husband, or on a wife, or on the good heart of another individual, because the power is not in people or person or thing or place or situation or condition. The power is all in God. The revelation of one power is contained here. Forswear not to anyone, behold not to anyone. You depend on no one's goodwill. You depend totally and completely on the power of your own being, for therein is the kingdom of God. And all power, all supply, all health, all wisdom is self-embodied. It flows from within to the without, and that which you release from the within in consciousness, secretly, returns to you as a very manifestation of health, home, supply, income, wisdom, love, companionship, all because you have released it from within in consciousness. You've cast this invisible bread on the water, and it comes back as your income. This is the revelation of forswear not. There is no personal sense involved in supply. And your employer has no choice but to give you the proper income, provided you are living in consciousness. And if you are, and your own employer will not give you the proper income, you will be lifted to where the proper income will come. You're not dependent on that one employer. You don't have to forswear yourself. You don't have to polish brass. You don't have to buck for private. We're being freed. We're being shown that we're not under the yoke of a man. We have within ourselves the very power of dominion. Now then, as we are told to loosen up, relax, loose yourself and let yourself go from bondage, don't be concerned about getting all tied up with somebody or some institution and making a lot of foolish promises that can't be kept, or if they were kept, would bind you for life. But rather place your trust not in men and not in princes, but in Him whom to know aright is your life eternal. How beautifully we're turned away here from all of the petty back-scratching and boot-washing which we see all around us. Men pledging away their integrity and their honor in exchange for petty favors. Now, any violation of this, obviously, is a clear indication that we have not caught the point, or that we don't have faith in the power of God within ourselves, or to be very specific, we have not reached a spiritual illumination which can show us that all power resides in the Spirit, and even the spirit of the individual to whom we would have been forsworn is now working with us, through us, because of oneness. Many people have to learn this. Some know it instinctively, but it's very subtle. You can think you're doing a wonderful thing to pledge yourself to a doctrine, and that would have been fine in days of the Pharisees, but we're in changing times when education is lifting people far beyond the yesterdays of bondage, when literacy is becoming more widespread, when enlightenment is no longer confined in a little monopoly. We're being given a message of freedom, liberation. We're being told that we are able to live on our divine right. And naturally we are given this information to pass along to our offspring, that they grow up beholding to no man. It would be wonderful if every cleric in the world, every politician in the world, every businessman in the world, every teacher in the world, in all grades of teaching, would reread that, not to forswear thyself, and then to dig in to the divinity of their being, to receive the word fresh daily, so that God would be guiding every word they spoke, every word that they delivered to their students. Then education and religion would become vitalized with the word made flesh. He sums it up with this: but let your communication be yea, yea, nay, nay. For whatsoever is more than these cometh of evil. We're not going to say nay, nay to God. So it must be yea, yea. As the word of the Father comes through, we obey it with a yea, yea. And that nay, nay must go to our friend illusion, false sense perception, mortal mind, world thought. That's where the nay, nay goes. I won't be tempted by you, but to God, yea, yea. And it's that simple. You maintain an alert to all of the external world, nay, nay. To the inner voice which guides you, yes. And as you do this, you're walking in your Father's footsteps. Your Father doeth the works. Your Father worketh, and you work hitherto. It's a very simple story of obedience to the word within. And that means, naturally, a rejection of the externals which are trying to persuade you of a world called good and evil. Nay, nay to this world, yea, yea to the kingdom within. Now, I think he amplifies as we go along. Ye have heard that it hath been said, an eye for an eye, tooth for a tooth. But I say unto you, that ye resist not evil. This is probably the revelation that we all need the most. Now that we're going to respond yea, yea only to the word within, and not to the tyrant or the politician, or to the man who is selling his own wares, regardless of what else he may hurt in so doing. Now we're learning the principle of resist not evil. And to the man on the street, resist not evil is ridiculous. Let's try to follow resist not evil down into its ultimate truth. Let's discover what causes evil. Let's see why the Master could say, turn the other cheek. Run after a man and give him your cloak if he takes your coat. Run 2 miles if he tells you to run 1. This doesn't sound very practical. Who is telling us to do this? Resist not evil. I say unto you, resist not evil. I. That's you. Your being, your soul, your consciousness, your divinity is saying unto you, resist not evil. It's coming from within you. It's telling you, resist not evil. There are 10,000 kinds of evil. And that means there are 10,000 things not to resist. And you say, not resist. I'll be buried alive. But wait a minute. We didn't come to this message to learn something we know. We came to learn something we don't know. And the reason we don't know it is because it's above our understanding. So naturally, when we receive something we don't know, our understanding is not going to rise to the comprehension of it. We're looking now at something which we cannot comprehend. How do you survive if you resist not evil? And then the voice within says, I will show you the way. I didn't create evil. What I didn't create isn't there. How can you resist what isn't there? And now you begin to question yourself, well, why do I think it's there if it's not there? And maybe this is a good moment to clarify the way evil comes into appearance. Suppose we took the human mind and sort of looked at it as if it were a needle with a little eye in it, a little eye of a needle in this human mind. And then suppose we looked at the mass mind, the universal mortal mind, and we see it starting to spin little threads of thought. And these threads of thought from the universal mortal mind come into the needle eye of your mind. And these threads weave through the needle eye of your mind, and now mortal mind weaves those threads into form. And these forms woven through the needle eye of your mind become the forms of this world. Good forms and bad forms. Of course, you're not aware that mortal mind universal is weaving these forms through your mind. You're quite convinced that they're your ideas, your thoughts, your sights, your touches, your senses functioning. But it's all universal mortal mind using you as the channel. And now it weaves its world of good and of evil. And I liken it to a sort of closed-circuit TV. Everything in there is real to those in it. To your human mind, the evil you see is so real. It's coming over that closed-circuit TV from universal mortal mind. And all of this constitutes this world. You won't find any God in it. You won't find God law in it. All you can find is human concept woven into appearances called people, persons, places, things, conditions, situations, this world. Not my kingdom. And there is where the evil is. And now you're told, resist not. And you say, well, what other world is there? Why should I not resist these things? And the Father says, in my kingdom, there is no evil. And when you learn the principle of non-resistance to evil, a beautiful thing happens. You come into control of your life. You come into dominion. Now then, we begin to accept the principle of non-resistance to evil, and we think we have it mastered. And so we look at evil, and we begin to say, I know you, you're evil. You're not even there. You're an illusion. And while we're saying it, it hits us on the head. And then we think, well, maybe I didn't do it right. Then we start another track. God is all. That's right, God is all. Because God is all, and God is good, this evil isn't there. That's the answer. This evil isn't there because God is good. And now the evil hits you on the head again. And you see, you've tried it now by affirming that God is all, and on the other side you've tried it by denying that the evil is there, but you're still getting black and blue. But I'm not resisting that evil. Why doesn't it work? The voice within says, resist not, and I'm just standing here doing nothing, just knowing it isn't there and God is all, but it won't go away. And so we're coming closer to the meaning of resist not evil. It doesn't mean don't defend your physical body with your hands. It doesn't mean don't pick up the sword. It means that plus something much more important. And we have to get to the very bottom of that meaning in order for it to have any sense whatsoever. There is a way not to resist evil, and that way we must come into an understanding of. Now then, the very moment that you deny the presence of evil, you are perpetuating that evil. The very moment that you affirm God as the only presence, you are still perpetuating that evil. And the only way you can resist not evil is to react without the slightest awareness of it. There cannot be even a hair's breadth of denial of its presence or a hair's breadth of affirmation that God is on the field. There must be a total non-reaction of the mind, which is the channel for the evil. You won't non-resist it by power or by might. You non-resist it by the silence of the mind in which you totally are indifferent to that evil. Total indifference is not denying its presence and is not affirming the presence of God. Now you know in the healing work, this has to prove out. And believe me, you can stand there all day affirming the presence of God and denying the presence of evil, and the patient is still suffering. And you only come to it through the hard work of trying everything you can think of until you find the only principle that works is the total, complete indifference to that evil. You're not a friend of your patient if you stand there denying the presence of that evil. You're an enemy of that patient. If you accept the evil in one moment in such a way that you react to it even by denying its presence, you've lost your case. And so now, resist not evil becomes a revelation not only that evil isn't there, it becomes a revelation that your mind had better not be there. You're going to have to sacrifice that human mind, which would like to affirm that the evil isn't there or deny that it's there. You're going to have to cross out that mind, and with that mind in activity, you can never not resist evil. Now this is a very basic, vital principle of life. Not just to heal a patient, but to live free of the evils of this world. You must be able to see them, hear them, smell them, taste them, touch them, and still have no human mind there to receive them. There is no other way to not resist evil. There must be a crucifixion of the human mind. Now that crucifixion of the human mind happens to be the focal point of all your spiritual work. Because when you crucify the human mind, you have laid the axe at the root of every problem that you can ever have. Here in Resist Not Evil, the Master gives us the supreme teaching. There must not be in you an activity of the human mind, for that activity is the father of the evil that you're trying to resist. There is no evil on this earth for you that does not come into existence through your human mind. That is the channel through which world thought functions. And only in the absence of that human mind are you ever going to be free of the evils of this world. Epidemics, disasters, all forms of famine, pestilence, disease. If you didn't have a human mind to receive them, your body could not show them forth. This is the channel through which we step out of Eden every morning and live out of Eden every day. Through this human mind, that little sabotage agent which we like to think we're thinking with. And it is always not only resisting evil, but it is so completely hypnotized that it doesn't know that the evil it's resisting, it has itself created. Your human mind is looking at illusions of its own creation and fearing them. This world is a mind creation, but not of divine mind. And each individual mind hooked into the closed-circuit TV of the world mind, the universal mortal mind, is looking at its own creations and fearing them, trying to overcome and conquer them. And there's only one way. We must kill their father, this human mind which created them, which is the outlet for them into this world. A human race without a human mind is a very difficult thing to envision, but nonetheless, the mind that was in Christ Jesus was not a human mind. And so we're clued in now to resist not evil as the great revelation that the cause of all error is the human mind receiving from the group human mind its concepts of this world and reproducing them through this human mind into forms called person, place, and thing. And the axe must go on the human mind. It is there that the crucifixion must occur. Then there will be no evil to resist. I think we can pause for a few minutes now and then come back to this. There was always a stress laid by Joel upon looking at an individual behind the eyes. Sometimes we think that we can look behind the eyes of an individual and read their soul, their commitment. And you'll discover that as you have made your own commitment, you have departed from the consciousness of this world into the consciousness of my kingdom, and this is what you discover behind the eyes of another individual. Which world is he living in? My kingdom or this world? And although there's no specific thing to look for, it is an intuitive feeling that comes to you that I recognize one who is living in my kingdom. I've seen that look in Joel's eyes as he looked at those of this world, and there was an instant when he withdrew. Just that instant of withdrawing, so that he had recognized those who were living in this world. And when he didn't recognize those who were living in this world, there was no withdrawal. You could feel it and catch that instant when the withdrawal took place. So it is as we look out upon others. It is rather quick and very decisive. You can instantly tell this is one who walks in my kingdom, and this is one who walks in this world. There really is not two, my kingdom and this world. There is one. There is one universe. The fact that most people are unaware of it is due to the world mesmerism, but there is but one. The one creation is the divine idea in which we are all walking. And what we see of this one universe determines our experience. If we see it through a glass darkly, we see this world. And if we see it through the unconditioned consciousness, we see my kingdom. But there are never two. There is the real and our false concept about the real. But only the real is here. And so there was a time, as human time goes, when the soul of man going through this one universe passed that point in which a new consciousness came to the man of earth. That new consciousness was not touched by most, but one received it, and there it bore fruit, and that one brought forth a new kind of being on the earth, a being who had not been under the prenatal hypnosis of all other earthlings, and could come forth unconditioned and learn how to live in the one universe without seeing it through a glass darkly. And when that individual learned how to live in the one universe, seeing it as it is instead of how it had appeared to men, he was able to challenge the identity of every person on earth. He could say, "You are not that which you appear to be. You are not mortal being. You are not man of flesh. You are the living spirit of the living God." Recently we spent $25 billion, and it enabled us to put a man on the moon. How extraordinary that we now discover that the first man on the moon is an atheist. This is the announcement about Neil Armstrong. Now the significance of that must be interpreted by each individual according to his own particular state of consciousness. But Neil Armstrong has stated he believes in technology. Now he is no more of an atheist than everyone living in the third dimension of consciousness. They simply are not aware of their atheism. He's aware of his. And the more you are in contact with this world, the more you will discover that the human beings around you are not in control of their lives. And the more you will discover of the wisdom of he who could see the universe as it is and proclaim, "Henceforth know ye no man after the flesh." More and more and more you will come to realize that you cannot place your faith in man, whose breath is in his nostrils. For wherein is he to be accounted for? The natural man receiveth not the things of God, is not under the law of God, neither indeed can he be. And although we have heard those words and reheard them, there does come a moment when you say, oh, there is no natural man. That's why I'm not to put my faith in him. He doesn't exist. And I have been putting my faith in non-existence. There is only the child of God. There is no other. And he who walks the face of this earth in the belief that he is a mortal being, a natural man, a creature, has no real existence. He is seeing himself through a glass darkly. as well as the universe around him. He has made himself into one who knows not who he is. Why, even Cain turned right around and slew his brother. The very firstborn in this world slew his own brother. We never realized the clue we were given. Man has been doing that since. Right in one family you find two are unalike. Why? Because the natural man is not the child of God. When you have not made your commitment to yourself, you still wander on two sides of the fence. And when I look into your eye, I can see that. For the eye that has made its commitment shines forth clearly and sings out, I am He, the living divine image and likeness of the Father. I am the Spirit. There's no mistaking about it in me. I'm not walking on two sides of the fence. My name is the invisible Son of God. You see that when you look into that eye. You see the fearlessness. You see the invincibility. You see the certainty that I am immortal self, not mortal, not born to die. Now today we have discovered another passage very important to all of us, which brings us more in line with the truth than our human minds would normally permit us to do. And that passage is in Colossians. Why we haven't seen it before, I don't know. But there it is, bold as life, telling us who we are. The passage is Colossians 1, the verse is 15. A few verses before it are important. Speaking of God, Paul says, who hath delivered us from the power of darkness and hath translated us into the kingdom of his dear Son. Now, referring to his dear Son, who is the image of the invisible God, the firstborn of every creature. And there's your key phrase, the firstborn of every creature. That is going to change this world. The dear Son of God is the firstborn of every creature. We in the flesh are the creature, but the firstborn of us is the Son of God. In other words, we were the firstborn before we became the creature. The Son of God is the firstborn of every creature. And if now we have considered ourselves the creature, the natural man, we are told that we were the firstborn before we became the creature. And this is the fall of man explained in 4 words. Christ is the firstborn who now appears as the creature because of our unawareness of the fact that we were the Spirit of God before we became this creature. And then the next step is the realization, but how could the Spirit of God change and become the creature? The answer is it didn't. We are still that Spirit. We are the firstborn. But the human race does not know it is the firstborn, and so it proceeds living as if it were the secondborn. It proceeds as if it were a branch without a tree, a blossom without a branch. And so it uses up its life force and then dies. But the knowledge that you are the firstborn and not the creature, but that the creature is our mortal concept through a glass darkly about our firstborn self, inevitably will change your consciousness and will lift the consciousness of this world. Now, as we take those words and translate them, we can bring them together with that other passage in Revelation. I think it's 26. Let's look at it. Blessed is he that hath part in the first resurrection. On such the second death hath no power, but they shall be priests of God and of Christ, and shall reign with him 1,000 years. Now here we're told that if we have part in the first resurrection, on us the second death has no power. And in Paul we're told that we are the firstborn before we appear in our own human consciousness as a creature. Now let's put it all together and see that now as the creature we are the secondborn, heading for the second death. And that clarifies the meaning of, if you take part in the first resurrection, the second death hath no part of you. As the secondborn heading toward the second death, we are to come in between this second birth and this second death, which is all humanhood. The secondborn is the birth of humanhood. The second death is the death of humanhood. But the first resurrection is between this birth and death, and when attained, it eliminates death, which is called the second death. In other words, the firstborn is your reality, and the first resurrection is your realization of it. When you realize that you are the firstborn, the Christ, the living Spirit of God, this is your first resurrection, or your return from the second birth, the false human birth, to the realization of Christhood, or your first resurrection. And from that moment on, death is no more. Now this is by way of clarification that this was the total realization which came through the mystics and was demonstrated by Jesus. He knew himself to be the firstborn, and then he proved it. And so later in James we are told that we are the first fruits of them who are sown upon the earth. And that is what we are becoming. As we become aware that we are the firstborn, the spiritual essence, and not the material appearance, we come out of the hypnosis of matter, slowly rise into that consciousness of the Christ as myself, my being. We walk knowingly in the one universe of spirit, and we are the first fruits returned to the true self, the true consciousness, oneness with God.